Good day to you all, and welcome to MAXforum from the Neuroverse. We will have 4 presentations today around the themes and work of our Neuroverse Festival, which was presented between variants of the COVID virus live in New York at 3 venues to robust audiences and exuberant houses and very successful artists who were all delighted to be in the same room together enjoying art and culture. So we look forward to this series of presentations and to your feedback. Please tell us what you think. And check out on our website the highlights of the festival and excerpts from the various pieces. We will start today with Bodies of Intelligence, with a presentation by Annie Murphy-Paul around her book, The Extended Mind, Thinking Outside the Brain. And as a curator and producer of live arts, I don't often make claims about what audiences take away, because each member of an audience brings something different to the experience and records it in their own memory with their own personal stamp. But I will venture to say that Annie answers for each of us some essential part of that question: what is the relationship between my mind and my body? And in reading this book, I came to reimagine my mind, its relation to the way I live. And it reassured me that this act we do in live arts, which is to embody, this act of embodiment is an act of resistance. So I look forward to having Annie speak to you today. She is a writer who's been published in the New York Times Magazine, Scientific American, America's Best Scientific Writing. She is recipient of the Rosalind Carter Mental Health Journalism Fellowship, among several other fellowships. She's a graduate of Yale University and of the Columbia School of Journalism. And she is currently a Learning Sciences Exchange Fellow. And before I hand it over to Annie, I want to acknowledge that we are posting this today and all 4 of the forums from unceded territories and waters of the Lenape people. It's important to acknowledge that. And I thank you for attending today. And Annie, I am at this point going to turn it over to you. And I look forward to seeing you again soon when we can once again be live.
Thank you all for attending, as I said, this amazing festival that's exploring what I think is an incredibly interesting question. I love the tagline of the festival, which is that it's exploring what it is to be human in the machine age. And I'm biased, but I think the theory of the extended mind has a lot to say on that subject. I'm the author of a book called The Extended Mind, but the extended mind is not my idea. It's something I borrowed from 2 philosophers, Andy Clark and David Chalmers. They first introduced this idea of the extended mind in a journal article in 1998. And when I read that journal article for the first time, I was absolutely arrested by its first sentence, which was, "Where does the mind stop and the rest of the world begin?" I just thought that was such a provocative question, such a deeply profound and interesting question, in part because the answer seems obvious, right? That the mind stops at the skull. The mind is contiguous with the brain. The mind is the brain. That's kind of the conventional answer. It's the one we've all grown up with. And Clark and Chalmers were saying it's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. The mind extends beyond the limits of the skull, of the brain, to embrace all these extraneural, outside the brain resources, and that we use these outside the brain resources to do our thinking. And the outside the brain resources they were talking about were the body below the neck, our physical surroundings, the spaces in which we learn and work, our relationships with other people, and also our tools, our technologies, our analog tools, and all of these resources that exist outside the brain, they were arguing, help us think. So what does it mean to be human in the machine age? Ironically or paradoxically, I think it means that we have brains that are not like computers. And this is more difficult than you might think to grapple with, because the analogy, the metaphor that compares the brain to a computer is really pervasive in our society. It's really deeply embedded in our society at this point. And it's even, you can see it in our language. We talk about bandwidth, we talk about memory, we talk about our brains as if they're computers. And I'd like to make the argument today that that's a very limiting metaphor. It's a very inaccurate metaphor. You know, we've during this festival, during the Neuroverse Festival, there's been some talk and some thinking about artificial intelligence, which is really exciting and something I find interesting as well. But I'm going to focus today on all the amazing qualities of biological intelligence, not artificial intelligence, but the biological intelligence that is our birthright as human beings. And I'm going to argue as well that that intelligence is not located just up here in the way that we imagine that it is, but that, as I've been saying, it's located in the body, in spaces, in relationships among people, in the way we use our tools. And I'm so delighted to be talking to this particular audience on this subject, because I've found that since my book came out in June of this year, of 2021, some of its most enthusiastic readers, the people who really get it, have been people in the arts. And I think initially I was surprised about that. It wasn't something I was expecting, but it makes perfect sense, because artists, people in the arts, have always been thinking with their bodies, thinking with spaces, thinking with collaborations with other people, and of course, thinking with the tools of their trade. So I think the extended mind is a natural fit for people in the arts. And I'd like to dive a little bit into the meaning of this idea, the contours of this theory, and also how it gets applied in the way we do our everyday thinking, our artistic and creative thinking, our educational thinking. So I'll start with that first, and I think most essential wellspring of intelligence, which is the body. And as you know, Western culture has a very old and entrenched bias that says that mind and brain are separate, and mind is elevated above the body. It's this sort of crystalline, immaculate cerebral sphere where rational thought goes on. And then somewhere down here is the body, this grubby animal, irrational, ungovernable kind of entity. And that, again, that bias, that prejudice is very deeply embedded in our culture, but it's really mistaken, because in fact, the body has a lot to contribute to intelligent thinking. The body is already intricately intertwined in our thinking processes. And all we need to do is really pay attention and see that that's the case. One way to do that is to tune into the flow of sensations that is with us all the time. It's scientists call it interoception. And it's striking that although, as I say, there is this flow of internal sensations that gives us information about what's going on inside our body, just the way we have sensors that let us know what's going on outside the body. We're always collecting information through our eyes, through our ears, through our noses, through our senses. There are analogous sensors within our bodies that are always collecting information and sending it to the brain. But what's interesting about interoception is that we're often not aware of it, and people vary widely in how attuned they are to their internal cues and signals. And many of us, most of us, I think, as we go about our daily lives, we're so focused on the vivid and ever-changing and stimulating world outside of us that we often don't pay any attention. We may even actively kind of suppress and push away those internal sensations, thinking that they don't have anything to contribute to intelligent thinking. But I would argue that's mistaken. Our internal sensations, those interoceptive cues, actually carry a real wealth, a treasure trove of non-conscious information. So as we go through our daily lives, we are taking in and processing so much information, far more than we could ever process or store on a conscious level, but we are processing it and saving it on a non-conscious level. And then the question becomes, well, how do we have access to that non-conscious information and knowledge and expertise if it is non-conscious? And the answer is the body. Those internal signals that we feel, whether it's butterflies in our stomach or a racing heartbeat or a tension in your shoulders, those are signals from the body that are alerting you to what you know, but can't access consciously. It's kind of like the body tapping us on the shoulder or tugging us on the sleeve to say, you've encountered a situation like this before. And the body is actually, those sensations are a reflection of how the body is preparing you to deal with that situation. So the more you are aware of those internal signals and the more you can incorporate those into your conscious thinking, the deeper and richer and more profound your thinking can become. And I like to think of it as a kind of oscillation between paying attention, of course, to all those vivid, stimulating experiences on the outside, but also taking time to check in about what's going on the inside and kind of oscillating between those two so that you're getting a more or less constant flow of information from both inside and outside. So interoception is one way that the body contributes to our thinking. Another way is movement and gesture. I've been moving my hands around a lot during this presentation already, and I was personally really delighted to discover that gesture is not at all a kind of, as we might think, like hapless hand waving or a clumsy kind of add-on to what is really important, which is our verbal expression. In fact, gestures are an integral part of the process of creating verbal expression. And in fact, gestures are often a step or two ahead of where our ability to verbalize an idea or a piece of information is. So our gestures can actually, they help us speak more fluently because they're actually informing and predicting what we are just about to be able to put words to. So our most advanced, our most cutting edge, our newest ideas show up first in our gestures. And what's interesting, I'm going to refer again to people in the arts here. Actors, of course, know the power of gestures and the power of movement. And there's some very interesting research done by a pair of researchers, Helga and Tony Noyce. Helga is a psychologist. Tony is an actor, and together they've collaborated on these extremely interesting experiments looking at how actors remember just reams and reams of lines, pages and pages of lines. And they did a number of in-depth interviews with actors and were told over and over again by actors that they don't even try to learn their lines until the play has been blocked, until they know how and where they're going to be moving as they say those lines, because bodily movement is a kind of scaffold on which we hang information like the particular words of a script. And indeed, the Noyces, Tony and Helga Noyce, found that even months and months after a production had wrapped, actors were able to recall their lines with really astonishing fidelity. And in fact, they had especially good memory for those lines that were spoken as they were moving or making some kind of gesture or movement. The lines that were most likely to be forgotten were those that were said when they were sitting or standing still, because of that tight connection between memory and physical movement. So having just touched on the importance of the body to thinking, I want to move on to talk about the importance of our setting, of our environment. And this is another way of talking about what it means to be human in the machine age, because what it means to be human is to be profoundly and deeply affected by where we are. You know, that is a distinction or a difference from the way a computer operates. You know, we've seen that computers don't have bodies, and so they don't have the kind of deeply grounded and embodied intelligence that humans come by naturally. And likewise, computers don't operate any differently depending on where they are. But human brains are really different from that. They are exquisitely context sensitive, meaning where we are really affects how we think. And one of the clearest examples of this is that we think differently when we're in nature, when we're in the outdoors. And I think that's something we all kind of instinctively know, that we feel often a very pleasant, kind of mood elevating sensation when we're outdoors. We may feel especially relaxed. We may feel especially open to new ideas or new associations. And there are scientific reasons for that. Human beings evolved in the outdoors. This life we live now, where we're indoors, inside houses or cars, most of the time, is a very recent development in the long span of human history. We evolved to live and to spend almost all our time outside. And as a result, our perceptual faculties, our senses are tuned to the kind of information, the kind of stimuli that we encounter when we're outside. So our brains very easily and effortlessly process what we see when we're outside. There's a limited range of color, green and more green, maybe some yellow and red. The leaves are turning here in New England where I live. There's gentle movement, not really fast movement. There's a lot of overlapping, gentle kind of rounded shapes, as opposed to the really sharp edges and angles that you would find in an urban environment or in an interior. And the brain finds this kind of information really easy to process. Interestingly, what the brain finds easy to process, it also tends to tag with a kind of positive valence. So the brain likes things that are easy for it to process. So that helps explain why we feel so good when we're outside, and why we find that our attention is not being drawn down in this very demanding way, as it might be when we're trying to navigate an urban setting or trying to focus on our work when we're inside. Rather, our attention is sort of pleasantly diverted here and there without us really having to exert any effort. And what this means is that, we talk so much about directing our attention, managing our attention, having our attention be distracted. So we're talking about the demand side, the demands on our attention, but we don't really think that much about the supply side of the equation. Where are we finding places and where are we finding opportunities to restore our attentional capacities, to refill the tank, so to speak? And it turns out that the fastest and easiest and most effective way to restore the tank of our attention, to refill the tank of our attention and restore our attentional capacities, is by spending time outside. That doesn't mean that we can't arrange our interiors to also support intelligent thinking. And that's another way in which we really are influenced by our physical setting. So there's some very interesting research about how what we see around us affects the way we think and the way we work. For example, when we see cues of identity, cues that remind us of who we are, in particular, who we are in that setting, whether it's our home office or whether it's our kitchen or whether it's our child's classroom, seeing cues or signals that remind you that you're a professional in this setting, or you're a cook in this setting, or you're a student, a scholar in this setting, really serve to strengthen our sense of competence and capability in that role, in that space. And likewise, cues of belonging, which let us know that we're part of a meaningful group. Having those present in our environment can really, we are such social creatures. We are always looking to see, do I belong here? Am I welcome here? Am I comfortable here? And that can use up a lot of mental bandwidth. So when we're surrounded by cues that remind us, you do belong here, you are a welcome part of this group, of this organization, we can kind of let those anxieties go and apply all of the mental bandwidth available to the work that we're doing. So I want to talk just for a moment also about what I call the space of ideas. We've talked about natural spaces, we talked about interior spaces, and then there's also the space of ideas in the sense of, we do so much inside our heads. That's really, that's our model of how thinking should happen. Should happen. It always strikes me that we're comfortable with very young children, like kindergartners, using manipulatives to learn math, or playing with objects as a part of their learning. But we expect people to put those aside as they get older. We see that as sort of childlike. And that, again, I think is a real mistake. And it's one that that artists and designers and architects have never fallen into, because they realize that they have learned, and it's part of their profession and their professional code, that actually where thinking happens is in the conversation between your mind, your eyes, your hand, the tool that you might be using, the model that you might be using to represent the thing that you're building. And so the space of ideas refers to the fact that our thinking is actually enhanced when we offload the contents of our minds onto physical space, whether that is a sketchbook or a canvas, or it could be a whiteboard, it could be a bulletin board, it could be a multi-monitor setup, which allows for so much it's so much more enriched thinking than the small screens that we habitually use. And this is the reason, once we get ideas and information out of our heads and onto physical space, we can engage with them in a different way. We can bring in all these embodied resources like spatial memory, like proprioception, which is the awareness of where our body is in space. If we've built a model, we can not only look at it, but engage with it, move our bodies around it, maybe manipulate different parts of it. The brain did not evolve to grapple with abstract or theoretical concepts. It really evolved to manipulate material objects and to navigate through a three-dimensional landscape. So the more we can turn ideas and information into physical objects that we manipulate as if they're tools, or into a three-dimensional landscape like that multi-monitor setup I was talking to you about, we can then, those embodied resources become available for our use. When all those ideas and information, when all that stays in our head, all those embodied resources that are, as again, the birthright of human beings and the wellspring of our intelligence, those get wasted. But when we can offload the contents of our heads onto physical space, interact with them, then we get a kind of cognitive bonus from getting those ideas out of our heads. So the last piece I want to talk to you about here is the way that we think with other people. And we live in a very individualistic society, one that's very focused on individual achievement, individual accomplishment. But in fact, the problems that we face as a community, as a society, as a world, as a planet, are so daunting and so wickedly complicated and complex that we actually, one mind at a time is really not sufficient to tackle those problems. Expertise is so specialized, information is so abundant. We really need collectives, group minds to come together and think as one in order to meet the moment. And it's very interesting to think about some of the ways that happens. As I say, it's a demand of our current moment, but the way we get there, the way we create a group mind, relies on some very almost primitive, almost visceral kinds of techniques, of biotechnologies of group formation, as one researcher calls it. And the one I'm thinking of right now is synchronous movement. When people move in the same way at the same time, it's kind of like a hack that persuades our minds that actually we are kind of one with these other people. We form a unity with these other people, and that allows us to cooperate and to collaborate with people more effectively. And I was saying this is a very old and almost kind of primitive strategy. And you can see that over the centuries in the ways that militaries have had their soldiers march together, or churches have had people engage in pattern kinds of activities that have them moving in the same way at the same time, or even things like dance, where people come together and move in the same way at the same time. They're creating a kind of cognitive synchrony and even a neural synchrony based on the synchrony of their actions and their movements. So psychologists like to talk about what they use a concept called entitivity, and that refers to how much does a group of individuals, how much does it feel like an entity, like a group unto itself. And entitivity is a little bit of a mouthful, so I prefer another word that psychologists also use, which is groupiness. How do you take a group of individuals and turn them into a group, a collective? And we've just talked about one, which is synchronous movement. And that can even mean taking something as simple as taking a walk together, because when people walk side by side, they tend to fall into a synchronous kind of rhythm. And plus you're getting some physical activity and you're getting outside. So you're killing many birds with one stone when you walk together with someone that you want to think with. But some other ways to create a feeling of groupiness are to have emotional experiences together. I think we've all experienced that kind of bonding that happens among people in a group who are having an who've had an emotional experience, positive or negative. I mean, there's a kind of glue that bonds people who've been through a kind of trauma together, if you think about people who've been through a wartime experience together. But that can also apply to simply self-disclosure and sharing your feelings with each other, which doesn't happen, I think, often enough in our groups and our teams in schools and workplaces. Another thing we can do to create a sense of groupiness and therefore a group mind is to engage in rituals together. And that's performing meaningful actions in a sort of patterned way together. And that can be, again, as simple as sharing a meal together. I think it's interesting that research has found that even the synchronous kind of, everyone's sort of making the same motions, that has the effect of bringing people together. And of course, sharing food has always been a very meaningful and powerful experience in the human story. And one other sort of tidbit from this research that I really enjoy is that this effect of coming together over a meal is actually enhanced, research finds, when people eat family style from shared dishes. And also, when food is really spicy, it actually has that physiological arousal that contributes to the coming together of synchronous movement. You're sweating together, or you're exerting yourself together. And actually, eating very spicy food raises our heart rate and can cause us to perspire, and raises our blood pressure. So eating family style, very spicy food can really bring a group together in a way that I hope that we can start doing again in the face of all the limitations that we observe with the pandemic. But to bring this conversation, this presentation back around to that really essential question, what does it mean to be human in the machine age? And my view is that what it means to be human is not to limit ourselves to the brain, not to limit ourselves to what's inside the skull, but to recognize that the very wellsprings of human intelligence, human creativity, human empathy are often located outside of our heads. They're located in our bodies. They're located in the spaces that we create. They're located in the relationships that we maintain with other people. And these things are the essence of our humanity, and they're worth preserving in the machine age. And in fact, I think, during the cognitive revolution of the middle of the last century, human beings created computers. I think in a sense, we created them as an idealized a notion of what a human brain should be, or what we wanted it to be, a human brain with all that beautiful, clean, rational thought, able to play chess and to figure out, to solve logical problems, but with all that sort of messy, grubby, bodily, bodily aspects, emotions, all that stuff engineered out. And it's turning out to be the case that all the things that human beings do so easily and effortlessly, that even a child can do, for example, navigating through a room or talking in a fluid way with another person. Those things are really hard for computers and robots to do. It turns out that you can't get rid of all those aspects of our humanity and still get something that looks like human intelligence. So much as we have created computers as a kind of idealized version of ourselves and then tried to be like them, and have felt sometimes, I think, like we fail when we don't have computer-like powers of memory or focus. I think we need to turn that around and say, what can machines learn from us? What can computers learn from us? And I think what they can learn from us is that intelligence is really rooted. It's rooted in our biological nature, our evolved nature. It's rooted in our bodies. It's rooted in space, real physical space, not virtual space. And it's rooted in our connections with other people. And if computers and machines ever want to approach anything like human intelligence and human creativity and human amazingness, then it's going to need to reckon with all the things that make us truly human. We can't cut any of that out. We can't leave any of that out. We actually need to embrace it and celebrate it. So I think I'll wrap up there. I think this question of exploring what it is to be human in a machine age is such a profound and interesting and timeless question. I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to explore it with you all, and I thank the organizers of the event for allowing me to be a part of it. Thank you.